That's really bright. Welcome, everybody. Great to be with all of you here today. My name is Josh Weiner. I'm from the Aspen Institute, and we've been working for over a decade on community college excellence. We also work with four-year institutions, and what we do is every other year we go out and we research the best community colleges in the country. What we mean by that is those that are actually delivering high, improving, and equitable levels of student success. We award a $1 million prize to the best community college, and joining me here today is the president of the latest prize winner, Amarillo College, who has now moved to Austin Community College. Russell Lowry Hart, and Pascal Charlot, who is now the managing director of the Aspen Institute College Excellence Program, but was campus president of Miami-Dade, and before that, dean of the Honors College, when they won the 2019 Aspen Prize. Yay. And so for those of you who came to talk about all the things you're reading about in the news about higher ed, you've come to the wrong place. We are hearing a lot about very important matters, including DEI on college campuses, affirmative action. We're hearing about protests about the Middle East. And we also have for a long time heard about the cost of college and sometimes completion rates. And you read about those in the press. But what's missing from each of those important conversations is a conversation about the fundamental purpose of higher education. And what we're here to talk about today is the purposes that are student-facing, that are people-facing. There's a knowledge creation purpose for higher ed that we're not going to talk about today, the creation of patents and other knowledge that fuel civil society and the economy and scientific invention. But we are here to talk about are the two other purposes of higher ed, and that is talent development and economic mobility. Fundamentally, the history of colleges in this country is a history of people getting educated, putting in the work, and getting ahead in life, having a better life because of higher ed. And it's also a history of an economy that has been driven forward dramatically because we've developed talent through higher ed. It's also true that our democracy is fueled by the knowledge created in higher ed. So in a fundamental sense, what we want to talk about is what's not being talked about in the news, which is the importance of higher ed for talent development and economic mobility. Community colleges are absolutely critical to that. And we just want to talk for a couple of minutes about why that is, to make clear why, as go community colleges, so will go talent development and economic mobility in our country. The first thing to acknowledge is that economic mobility is down in our country. This comes from Opportunity Insights. Many of you have heard of Raj Chetty and the research that he and his colleagues have done. But this is in birth year, based on birth year, the chances that somebody at 30 years will be earning more than their parents earned. Economic mobility is down. The good news is that for every level of higher education in this country, the chances that you will be earning more money go up, and the chances that you will be employed increase. In this case, unemployment goes down with each level of education. So that's about higher ed generally, but there's a second issue, which is talent in this country. And you've all been reading about this. How many of you have known somebody who has struggled to get into a doctor's office because of limited capacity? We're all reading about this. Nursing shortages. All over this country are happening. Teacher shortages, substitute teachers. Any of you have parents who are seeing increases in the number of substitute teachers in the classrooms. Those who run companies. Here in Austin, there's a huge technology economy here, rooted in technology. We can't find software engineers, et cetera, et cetera. We're finding it in manufacturing as well. I was speaking to somebody who is responsible for implementing the CHIPS Act, to bring chips manufacturing back to the country. The biggest impediment to making that work is going to be finding people who can do the manufacturing. So we've got talent shortages in this country. And in both cases, community colleges will be essential to both bringing back economic mobility, but also in filling talent shortages. Why is that? Well, we know that community colleges are less expensive than four-year institutions, substantially less expensive, nearly a third the tuition costs. And given that they're rarely residential, those costs are not incurred in the same way as in four-year institutions. We also know that community colleges have much stronger ties in real time to K-12 schools as four-year schools, than four-year schools do. This was a shocker to me when I learned it several years ago, but we probably have as many students taking dual enrollment classes now in this country as AP classes. Over 1 million students. There are colleges here in the state of Texas where half the students are high school students. These are community colleges. And 70% of all those dual enrollment classes are being taught by community colleges, the credits conferred by community colleges. There are also promise programs. We've heard about these programs to make college free. Well, the fine print is it's the first 2 years are free. In essence, it's free community college. That creates real ties to recent high school graduates that will be increasing over time. The last couple of slides I just want to share are that 38% of all undergraduates nationally are in community college. Remember, it's just the first 2 years of college. So what does that mean? That means that it's the majority of of people in their first 2 years. The majority of freshmen and sophomores in this country are not in four-year schools, they're in community colleges. 6 or 7 million students. And they're very diverse. The growing parts of the population, particularly Hispanic Americans, Latinx students, are coming to community college. That's where they're starting. Finally, community colleges have been and remain the most likely place for adults to come. 43% of community college students over the age of 22. Remember, community colleges only have 38% of the population, so it's a disproportionately high number of returning adults who are coming to be upskilled in higher ed. So if we're going to solve these problems, we need community colleges to do that work. And as I mentioned, we've been researching what great community colleges do, and we really want to share with you what does this look like in practice. What we're going to do is we're going to walk through with Pascal and Russell some examples, 4 examples, and we're going to take you through the life cycle of a student, starting with dual enrollment, moving through completion, talking about transfer and bachelor's attainment, hugely important, and then economic development, getting a job. So let's start with Pascal to talk a little bit about the other most recent winner of the Aspen Prize, Imperial Valley College. Pascal?
Thanks, Josh. Good afternoon, everyone. You know, as Josh is talking about the key role that community colleges play in the community, it's important to recognize that leadership truly matters. As we think about the scale of the challenges we're trying to address, it's important to have a big vision and a bold vision that will take the partnerships in the community to a whole nother level if we're really trying to improve outcomes for communities that have been historically left behind. And the other Aspen Prize winner, Imperial Valley, did a phenomenal job by starting with a really big and bold vision. Located in Southern California, serving a remote community that is extremely rural and dealing with high levels of unemployment and poverty, Imperial Valley drew a line in the sand. They decided they wanted to try to eradicate poverty. And in order to do that in the community, they were going to start by building a college-going culture that permeated not only Imperial Valley, but the K-12 partners as well. In order to do it effectively, they recognized the need to build post-graduation student success pathways so that students could see a future beyond the present. And as a result, the leadership developed partnerships with key universities, not only in California, but also in Arizona, and going as far as Missouri for an online option. They understood the student population needed to have options that would keep them near home, but still provide a glimmer of hope. So within the context of this bold vision, and through the post-graduation student success outcomes they were able to create, they then designed backward and worked very closely with the K-12 partners in ways that Josh just described. They reimagined the recruitment and advising process so that students could see in high school a pathway to a transfer degree. What this means is a high school student could develop an educational plan while still in high school. It's an abbreviated plan, but it makes the future real. And this is so important in communities that have lost faith and trust in education systems that have historically failed them. In addition, these advisors understood the pathways to the transfer pipeline because the universities helped to develop the core sequences that needed to be understood in order to make those decisions. As a result, dual enrollment became a strategic opportunity. Advisors could help students who understood their pathway to maximize dual enrollment courses. Why is this important? Because when you're dealing with populations with limited time and resources, they don't have either one to waste. As a result of aligning these courses through dual enrollment, it helps set students up for better credit mobility and to accelerate their ability to reach their degree. As a result of all of these efforts, what you started to recognize is that Imperial Valley started to address the barriers that would get in the way of students completing. And one of the key barriers, which is not unique to Imperial Valley, but because of the scale that they were trying to achieve and the transformation they hoped to bring to their community, became a real opportunity. And that was dealing with the scheduling challenges. At many institutions, scheduling is taken for granted. It's treated like something that's simply rolled over. It's based on when faculty want to teach. But in the context of the game that Imperial Valley was playing, they shifted the conversation so that the schedule was based on students' preferences and availability. This matters when students are working part-time and need courses in order to reach their ultimate goals. So by shifting the scheduling to focus on students' preferences, they then created clear pathways to fulfill the transfer goals that the students were aiming for. As a result of all of these efforts, Imperial Valley experienced significant gains. The next slide.
Yeah, thank you, Pascal. And the gains were a 12% percentage point increase in completion rates in just 4 years, to be clear. And that's because students arrived at Imperial Valley knowing what they wanted to do. There's really good evidence from the Community College Research Center that when students know what they want to do, they're going to finish their degrees. We have far too many students wandering through the curriculum on college campuses, just taking courses. Get your gen eds out of the way is what counselors tell them, right? Yeah. That is the worst thing to tell a student. Get your gen eds. Oh, I'm just going to take some more courses. It's like I'm still in high school. No, get students connected even before they finish high school to a purpose, and they've got a shot of completing those results. It's also true that their transfer rates after leaving Imperial Valley are higher because students have a sense of purpose and have taken the right courses in the right sequence. We now want to move to, these are the results as was just mentioned. The other thing is that 60% of local high school graduates enroll at Imperial Valley after they leave. We've never seen that rate. So they're achieving the goal, not by saying, come to us, trust us, we're going to give you what you want. They're saying, we're going to help you figure out what you want and get you on the right path and make progress to a degree. So now I want to turn to Russell to talk a little bit about, okay, you've got students in school, how are you going to get them through the programs? Community colleges have increased graduation rates over a decade by 9 percentage points nationally, much more than four-year schools have. There's been really good intentional work. There's still a long way to go. But one of the leaders in that, in doing that intentionally, has been Amarillo College. I'd like to invite Russell to talk a little bit about what it looks like to dramatically improve graduation rates once students arrive.
Thank you. So glad to be here. Glad that you're in this space. Any moment that we get to celebrate community colleges, I think, is a moment that improves education. And I'm really glad to welcome my colleagues to Austin. Glad that you're here, the epicenter of economic transformation for our country. And I think what you've heard and what I hopefully can add is why I left universities to come to the community college sector. If you want to see transformation and innovation in higher education, it is happening at scale in the community college sector. And I have a lot of faith in my leaders across the country, my colleagues who are leading transformation. And a lot of what we did in Amarillo reflected what we learned was happening at other schools. The key to the reforms that I want to talk through is there's nothing that we did in Amarillo that isn't already being done in most every community college. The difference in Amarillo is that it was done at scale, it was done collaboratively across the institution, there was clarity in what we were accomplishing, and it was rooted in a culture of love and care for our students and each other. There were really 5 main reforms, which is really important. Your data can identify what's working and what's not working. I think the challenge that we had in Amarillo is that we were doing 50 reforms and we needed to really focus on 5, and I want to talk about 3. We got a lot of attention for our work on poverty and removing poverty barriers. Really important work and training everyone to understand poverty and root ourselves around it. And we offered clear program maps that Imperial Valley built themselves around. The 3 things that we don't often understand were the 8-week transformation, mandatory tutoring, and co-rec. So I want to talk about those 3 briefly. When I left Amarillo, over 80% of all of our classes were in 8 weeks. That accelerated learning was really important for the typical student that we served in Amarillo, that we're serving in Austin, and that we serve across the country. They're typically first-gen students of color, older adults that are working 2 part-time jobs while they're raising a kid. They cannot afford to take 4, 5, and 6 years to get a certificate or a degree that leads to a family-sustaining wage. We have to accelerate our learning, and our systems are not set up to move a part-time student through in a full-time world. So 8 weeks became really important, and being deliberate about accelerating the learning for our typical student was clear. Eliminating developmental education was transformational for us. Giving those same students that might have needed developmental education the full wraparound supports both for their lives outside the classroom and their learning inside the classroom while they were in a 4-credit was incredible and transformational. 100% co-rec, no gatekeeping and getting students into a 4-credit course. We just had to invest our resources to ensure that we could love that student to the learning for the class. The final issue, and I think maybe the most important of all of the reforms, was clear mandatory tutoring with triggers. So if you took a class in Amarillo, we're working towards this in Austin, and you got a 75 or below on the test or the homework or the writing assignment, you had to take tutoring for 30 minutes before you could complete the next assignment or complete the next test. It was integrated into the class. Those tutoring opportunities were available 24/7. The tutor was seen as a learning partner with the instructor, and the tutoring centers and the instructors shared gradebooks, shared assignments, and walked in co-facilitators of the learning inside the classroom. Collectively, those added up to a dramatic transformation of both clarity and effectiveness at scale. Final thing, I get really frustrated in education because we talk about what we are doing and we check the box, and we don't ask ourselves the harder question of, is it working at scale? In Amarillo and now in Austin, we will be doing transformation at scale, and we will only invest in it when it's working.
Thank you, Russell. I particularly appreciate that 75% marker because it signals that we care about mastery. It signals that we actually care about students, not just passing the course, but even in an assignment, learning the material really well so you're prepared for the next stage in the work. Really powerful. The only other thing I would mention is nationally, the evidence on co-requisite classes, those are putting students who might have been deemed underprepared based on the AccuPlacer exam or some other exam, putting them right into credit-bearing courses with just-in-time catch-up to get them ready, it's been shown nationally to be so much better than freestanding developmental education. Any college that's not doing it, if they're in your community, ask why they're not doing it. It's not something that the evidence is at all unclear about. So thank you for letting us know. So now we now have students getting through college, but the vast majority of community college students don't come to get an associate degree. They come to get a bachelor's degree. It's one of the things we've lost. Community colleges, when they were created, the first community college in 1901, Joliet Junior College, was called a junior college because it was the first 2 years of a bachelor's degree. Now, we don't use the term junior college anymore for good reason. These are not junior colleges. These are full-on, complete colleges. But the reality is that it remains today that something like 80% of students who enter community college say they want a bachelor's. Unfortunately, 6 years later, only 16% have a degree. And we, with our colleagues at the Community College Research Center, have just put out a tracking transfer report. If you want to learn more about how your state is doing, we've ranked all the states in how well they're doing in helping community college students get to four-year schools and then go on to get bachelor's degrees. And so the question really is, which community colleges, we gather this in the Aspen Prize, which community colleges don't just help students get an associate degree or a certificate, but actually move on to a bachelor's? And in our research, there are several tremendous partnerships that we've identified, including some here in San Antonio that are fantastic. But the one we want to point to is in Northern Virginia. And Pascal, do you want to talk a little bit about George Mason University with Northern Virginia Community College?
Absolutely. And one of the things that Russell did not mention was the important work they did to center the students in the design of all of these reforms. You know, as you thought about improving outcomes at scale, it was important who you were designing for. And we see that trend in this partnership as well. The transfer student became the student at the center of the design. And transfer students have two different identities. There's the identity coming from the two-year institution, and NOVA understood that they owned post-graduation student success, that their responsibility to the student did not stop when the student graduated, but that it was important for them to maintain a relationship with Mason to understand how the students performed when they transfer, so that they could take that information back and filter it into the design of the student experience. The transfer partner, George Mason, also valued the transfer student from the perspective of the student helping to advance their mission and their enrollment strategy. They understood that they needed to create systems that would create a sense of belonging and value for those students, and more importantly, to ensure that affordability and time to degree would be achieved in order for those students to earn their bachelor's degree. As a result, these two institutions have made a long-standing commitment that has actually survived 3 pairs of presidents at both institutions because it is so embedded in the system and has reached scale in a sustainable way in the ways that Russell and Josh have been describing. This program is a dual admission guaranteed transfer that is aligned through MAPS and is supported by an advisement infrastructure that is honored by both institutions. They have developed cross-institutional governance structures to ensure that the process is not only managed, but that it continues to evolve as the student needs evolve, addressing the challenges and barriers that would prevent the students in order to succeed. The program serves 3,300 students, 40% of whom are low income, and the majority are students of color. So when we think about scale, these are the kinds of numbers that actually change the game, Josh, in the ways that you're describing. And the results of this intentionality, you see them. 87% retention, fall to fall. You're seeing a more accelerated time to degree with less credits. And students in the advanced program are saving $15,000, which is significant as compared to those who start at George Mason. And in addition, the high visibility of this partnership in the community is also attracting more resources from employers who see the viability of talent coming through the pipeline.
Yeah, the results are remarkable. Northrop Grumman, this was announced with the governor and $1 million from Northrop Grumman. I think the data point here is that the majority of these students are doing 60 plus 60. That's 60 credits plus 2 years and then 2 years. And they are admitted together. They get a joint ID card the minute they start Northern Virginia Community College. Imagine what that means for students, right? Not, if you do all of this stuff, then you can apply and maybe we'll let you in, right? Not even, if you do all this stuff, we're guaranteed to let you in. No. You are in, and as long as you do reasonably well, I think it's a 2.5 average, you stay. You come right through. It's changing the value proposition for students from a if-then to a yes-unless proposition. And that is, I mean, these numbers, the graduation rates we haven't had for long enough, but they're very, very high. Only 8% of students in this country who get a bachelor's degree and started at community college follow a 2+2 pathway, meaning they did 60 and 60. Right? Only 8%. The vast majority are swirling all around. The majority of these students are following 60 plus 60. This is a model that is very unusual and incredibly successful. So thank you for sharing that. So, of course, even a bachelor's degree is not the ultimate goal for students, and while higher education has a lot of different purposes, one of the most important to students is that people want a better life. And that means a fulfilling job and career that pays living wages for yourself, possibly a family. And more community colleges are and are being called on to ensure that their programs lead to a good job, either via transfer and bachelor's attainment or directly in the workforce. What we know is that there are a bunch of community college credentials that don't, in fact, lead to good jobs. Cosmetology, unfortunately, early childhood education, often massage therapy. These are credentials that are not leading to decent wages, and more community colleges are calling on themselves to ask the question, what should we be offering, and how do we ensure that we, through our programs and through our employer partnerships, make sure that students have a good life when they leave, that they're better off than they would have been had they only had a high school diploma. And so, Russell, do you want to talk a little bit about what you've seen in the field generally, and then I'll share one example from the field.
So much of higher ed is set up for ourselves as educators, not for our students. And we engage in programs because we like them or they're sexy and they sell, and don't allow the labor market outcomes to dictate whether we should engage them or not. In Amarillo, there were several programs that we ended because the student spending their money to get a degree in that program or certificate didn't add a cent to what they made in the field. And so in those scenarios, it's incumbent on the employer to step in. If they're not going to pay for the credential, then we shouldn't be a tool for that economic inequity. What we've learned for our students in Amarillo, and I think we're also learning here in Austin, is given the life barriers that they bring with them into the learning experience, that we can't wait for them to actually start experiencing and preparing for that family sustaining wage on the back end of the credential. We have to pull in the employers in the design of the program and as partners in the learning and execution of the program. And for our students, that work-based learning is critically important to keeping them on task, giving them clarity about what they're wanting to do, and paying them to learn. That earn and learn model for our students in community colleges actually means that they can stay in community college.
Yeah, work-based learning is so important. I would argue in four-year institutions that we've worked with as well, hugely important. So an example of this, last point just from our examples, adults in community colleges, there were about 3 million students during the last recession at around 2010 in community colleges, meaning people over the age of 25 years or older. Today it's under 2 million. A lot of what we've seen in enrollment declines have happened because adults are not there. It's hugely important for community colleges to offer the kinds of short-term training that allow adults to upskill themselves. And the reality is that unless those short-term training programs lead to good jobs, right, actually help, people aren't going to show up. They also have to be short enough and inexpensive enough for students to be able to go through them. Imagine a day laborer, somebody who's literally putting their life on the line for a construction job, a labor job without skills, what are the chances they're going to show up and complete a bachelor's degree or an associate degree that takes 2 years? These are people who have to get work right away. And recognizing this, Valencia College, the first winner of the Aspen Prize in Orlando, Florida, has built accelerated skills training programs that have an average of $16 or $17 an hour wages with benefits. They're all industry recognized. Now you might say, well, that's not a great wage, but they're stacking and they take 10 weeks on average, right? So they're very quick. And over 95% of them are free to students. They don't cost a dime. In fact, they've recently been raising money from the United Way to pay students an actual wage so that they can replace the income that they would have lost. What's remarkable, virtually every community college has some programs like this. What's remarkable about Valencia's is that they have a wage minimum that they won't offer programs beyond. They focused in 4 particular fields that offer better wages. That it's free for students, which is not easy to do because short-term training programs don't get the same kind of federal money that credit programs do. And it's at scale. They are up to 1,000 industry-recognized credentials every year that they're delivering. And if you get a day laborer with a construction certificate to $16.50 an hour in 10 weeks with benefits, and then there's another certificate that gets them to $18 or $19 an hour in another 10 weeks, that can be life-changing. They also stack to some of the credit programs, so this is not a dead end at Valencia. This was last year, 944 students. This year, they say they're on track for over 1,000. 94% completion rate, 82% job placement rate, and again, 95% of these are free for students. There are worker shortages in manufacturing, in shorter-term information technology, in construction trades, any place where I bet you there are shortages here in a lot of trades in Austin with all of the construction happening. Community colleges are the means to bringing adults back, getting them upskilled, and improving their life circumstances, and Valencia has proven that that's possible. So what we'd like to do now is to just mention a few things that you can do. We know that this is a varied audience that comes to South by Southwest, many educators, but my guess is that most people in this audience, if not everybody, has a degree, mostly from 4-year colleges. I know before I started doing this work, I didn't know much about community college. So one of the questions is, what can you do to help bring about the strength of community colleges? So for anybody here who's employing people at any sort of scale, work with community colleges to define specific worker needs. Get to a number and get a commitment that they're going to deliver talented people to you in the degrees that you need. And remember, if what you're hiring for are bachelors and beyond, they're still a conduit to that. They need to bring in the 4-year school. But employers really need to see community colleges as not just short-term credential and workforce engines, but also liberal arts education providers. Second, anybody who's in K-12, align your dual enrollment courses with credentials of value. Partner with community colleges to develop the kinds of clear pathways Pascal described are happening at Imperial Valley. Right now, it's the Wild West in dual enrollment. Students are taking random courses. There's nothing wrong with that. Evidence shows that dual enrollment courses are more rigorous on average than the average high school course. So these are good courses. But we're leaving a lot on the table by not aligning them to career paths. So think about that. Anybody here who's a policymaker? Community colleges still are not funded the way 4-year institutions are. I'm an advocate for more higher ed funding, but I was on a panel through the Century Foundation, and we had found that during the decade from 2000 to 2010, and this continues today, community colleges saw a $1 increase in funding per student. Research universities, $14,000 increase in funding per student. We've got to fund community colleges well and equitably, but we also have to hold them accountable for making sure that they are graduating more students and delivering stronger transfer and job outcomes. Fourth, anybody here who's from a university, develop scaled partnerships with community college and guarantee slots, give financial aid, ensure that credits apply, work with community colleges closely. If you feel like students aren't ready, well, get in there and work with community colleges. Don't just assume that people know that there's a misalignment of curriculum and expectations. And then finally, if you are giving to your university, consider aligning, or engaged in your university as an alumni, consider aligning those efforts with community college transfer. The single biggest under-addressed issue in higher ed attainment in this country are students who start in community college, want a bachelor's degree, and don't get one. Universities have got to get in the game to own that challenge. It's not enough for them to say, well, you know, it's up to the community college. No, it's a partnership. And universities are in the driver's seat very often. And so align your engagement with your university to that goal. So now we'd like to answer questions that you may have, and then right before we finish, I'll invite the panelists to have closing remarks. So the first question from Matt Radcliffe, I'll read them. Can you share any success stories or tips on building consensus among faculty and staff for unpopular but necessary changes? Who'd like to tackle that one?
Go ahead.
Wow, ladies first.
I love that question. It's a great question.
Well, one of the things that we've noticed is when leaders choose to use data strategically and intentionally and couple it with student voices, it can change the narrative. It actually allows you to shift the conversation from one that is politically and siloed to one that actually centers on the mission to advance the work. Now, it also helps if the environment being created is one where there's transparency and honesty and trust is being developed. It helps to create fertile ground for the kind of conversation I think that is underneath the question. But it has been extremely helpful to use data very effectively, coupled with strong communication skills to build buy-in at every level of the organization in order to change the conversation.
Data and student voice are critical. But I think we often, in education, we're all drowning in education and data. We have more data than we've ever had access to in our professional careers, and we keep asking data to tell us what decision to make. And the data is never going to tell us what decision to make. The data is going to tell us what questions to start asking our students. And so what I used in Amarillo, what we're using here in Austin are student secret shoppers. They are paid to give us feedback on how they're receiving us, and then are a part of the design. Once faculty and staff understand why a reform is necessary, that it's not some administrative plot, that it really is student-driven based on data and experiences, and they're engaged in the design process alongside students rather than it being a top-down engagement. Faculty who are typically resistant will lead the transformation and reformation as long as we understand the why and are clear in listening to students and centering the conversation around data.
Thank you, Russell. I would wholeheartedly endorse both of those. The third thing I would add is have a teaching and learning strategy. Not enough colleges actually have a college-wide teaching and learning strategy. We see this at colleges that have great results. Faculty, what do faculty do every day? They're in the classroom teaching, they're grading papers, they're advising students. Far too often we ask them to be engaged in committees on getting graduation rates up, but we're not engaging them in teaching and learning at scale. So a really good strategy to improve teaching and learning, the way the best K-12 schools do and the best community colleges and four-year schools do, is critical to engaging. So for any leader in higher ed, a dean, a department chair, a provost, a president, I would say, what is your college-wide or your department-wide, your division-wide teaching and learning strategy for excellence in learning? That's the most important thing to get faculty engaged alongside being clear with them why change is needed. I'll take the second one on what role should community colleges play in sunsetting academic programs that don't lead to economic mobility. For example, business has a higher ROI than art. So the first thing I would say is that it's not a question of a higher ROI, is the ROI enough to get you across the finish line? The last thing I want is for higher ed to stop producing teachers because they make less than financial analysts, right? That's not what we should be aiming for. But both of those cross a line where you can earn a decent living in an urban area as a teacher or a financial analyst. And we want students to fulfill their dreams. I think the first thing every college needs to do is know what the results of their programs are. We work with colleges to say, what are the actual results out of different programs? If colleges analyzed that and owned those data, they would do the right thing. I want to give you an example in art. Just because art doesn't have great average outcomes doesn't mean you need to shut art down. The Maryland Institute College of Art several years ago discovered that its students didn't have great outcomes. It is an art school for undergraduates. Its undergraduates didn't. But they then looked into it and they found out that the ones who had teaching credentials and knew how to sell their art were making much better livings. And so they embedded in their entire curriculum some education courses. You need to learn how to teach and you need to learn how to sell as part of your art program. It doesn't mean stopping art, but it does mean helping students develop those skills that will enable them to earn a decent living with the art they want to produce. So I think the key for higher ed isn't to shut down a whole bunch of programs. It's to look at the data and then decide, okay, the data don't tell me what to do. They tell me where my problems are, as Russell said. Now what am I going to do about it?
The only thing I would add is that there is a difference between an ROI for a workforce program and ROI for liberal arts. And liberal arts are foundational to learning and perspective building and person shaping. That is their ROI. Where I get concerned is in Amarillo, we closed a culinary program because the students with a certificate from the culinary program made the exact same amount in the community as students without the culinary degree certificate. So we were literally stealing money from students, forcing them into student loan debt to come get a certificate that didn't improve their financial outcome. That's the kind of questions that we have to ask ourselves, and we have to have the courage to answer it by ending things that aren't benefiting students long term.
And the reflection between Josh and Russell actually speaks to the question related to how do we ensure equity? And it is by looking at the value we're delivering to whom and for what. And there's a degree of discipline that comes with not only looking at the data, but asking the right questions with the right partners and with the right audience. And then what do you do with the answers in order to create a continuous improvement loop within the culture of your institution and across the partnerships? For far too long, we have ignored the data that has revealed that we were underserving specific populations for far too long. And so much of what's happening in the country now is trying to change that conversation, but it does require a degree of discipline in order to understand which interventions are working, and again, for whom and for what purpose. But the equity, it has to be baked into the design with an expectation of a regular cadence of engaging with the data and having the key conversations.
This notion of equity in what for whom is so important, Pascal. You know, if you focus on equity in graduation rates, you might, and I've seen colleges do this. They get a lot of students, black students, Latinx students, women of color, into these programs that are general studies associate degrees. We're going to just complete general studies associate degrees. Well, guess what? That's not going to give you junior year standing in a major at a university, and it doesn't have a lot of labor market value in most labor markets. We need pre-major associate degrees. So if you're just saying equity and completion, but not completion of what, you don't also look at equity and transfer and bachelor's attainment, equity and good jobs, you're going to be missing the boat. So this question comes from Felicia Williams Dennis about how do we ensure equity. One is you got to disaggregate the data and see what the outcomes are for different groups of students. That's something we teach in all of our fellowship programs. But then beyond that, you've got to be clear about equity in what for whom. Where are the gaps we're aiming for? You know, in a lot of colleges, the income-based gaps may be greater than a race-based gap. At others, the race-based gap may be greater than an income-based gap. Sometimes it's intersectionality of women of color who are loaded into the caring professions and these low-value credentials. We need to know who we're aiming for what particular outcome. The greater clarity gained by that, the better shot colleges have of achieving strong results.
Can I just say quickly, one of the things that has been really helpful to me is to change the location of power in the equity conversation. When we disaggregate data, I think we in education often want to talk about the gaps in equity as a student problem when it is an institutional problem. If there are, when you disaggregate your data and there are gaps in student achievement, that does not pretend to be the student's problem. It means institutionally, we have designed systems that create inequities, and so we have to look at the system design to ensure that they promote equity. And the only way you can do that is if you involve the students that are most affected by the institutional gaps in equity in redesigning the systems that they're receiving. And the little Russell sermon you're getting is that I think we like to talk about equity in education, but we don't often like to redesign our systems with an equity mindset. And so we approach equity by just offering training around using the right languages and specialized programs when our students need us to change the systems that promote institutional inequity. And the only way to do that is to engage them and actually pay them to help you redesign your institutions.
And in addition to those systems, yeah. But in addition to the systems that Russell is describing, we need the teaching and learning to work.
Yeah.
And we saw, someone asked a question about what role faculty play in these kinds of transformation. It's faculty working across both institutions to ensure that the rigor is at the appropriate level, that they're learning from one another, that there's mutual respect. You know, the advanced model, for years, the disciplines have been working together and studying each other's syllabi and figuring out how do they better serve these students. Gaining value through your education is an equity strategy. Ensuring that students are prepared is an equity strategy, and it's really powerful when the faculty own the pathway that will ensure a seamless transfer from the 2-year to a 4-year, and that's a key way faculty have played a role in these transformations.
Thank you. So I'm going to move to the next one. I think we've covered. What can funders do to help catalyze partnerships between 4-year institutions and community colleges? Russell, your college has been involved in some efforts that were funded by funders. Do you have reflections on that? And Pascal, in your work with as a dean of the Honors College, you work with a lot of transfer students. Love to hear both of your thoughts about this.
So, go ahead. No, me, okay. So I love the question because I think funders have a really important role to play here, but I'm going to ask you to play it in a different way than you typically have. I don't know of institutional leaders in the country, either at the 4-year or 2-year, that aren't committed to partnerships. But where I think leaders get trapped is they don't want to actually change the systems and tackle the heart-to-heart and mind-to-mind work that has to align programs with each other from a 4 and a 2-year. And it's that faculty-to-faculty work and dean-to-dean work where we've had intentionality in building out leadership training for presidents and chancellors and vice presidents and vice chancellors. We need leadership training that prepares our deans and department chairs and faculty for the kind of transformation that they have to be at the center of. Because I can talk about it, I can create space for it, I can make it an institutional priority, and I'm doing that here in Austin the same way I did in Amarillo. But I am having to spend a lot of time trying to get our faculty and staff prepared and understand the kinds of alignment that are necessary. And we need funding in that space. And community colleges are affordable. Sorry about my colleagues at 4 years, you are not. And we need funders to help us fund that transition and transfer financially for our students at the 4-year level.
I echo 100%. Students need money. That is the #1 deterrent. They will do the work, they will be prepared to transfer, but the scholarship dollars for transfer students is never enough, so you can't go wrong in investing in scholarship dollars for students. I will also encourage you to consider how might you incentivize the long game? Because when we're thinking about these pipelines, it's complicated to align 2 institutional systems. The aim is to create a seamless experience for the students. That in and of itself is a new stream of work And so as you're thinking about incentivizing these partnerships, how do you fund across institutional infrastructure? How do you identify positions that can be funded to work at both institutions to ensure that the systems are communicating effectively? That third stream of work that is actually the marriage between the two institutions is always in need of ripe resources to ensure that it's sustainable to build scalable systems.
Yeah, I agree. I would just add, ask for scale. Just as funders, ask for scale.
Yeah.
Far too often we have these isolated acts of excellence. We're going to have a 20-person program in engineering that's going to get 20 students through, and there are 20,000 students at the community college and 20,000 students at the university, and you're funding for 20. Really think about how to fund for scale. Ask for numbers. How many are you going to let in? What are their graduation rates are going to be? Make sure that they're treated fairly by the university on financial aid. Here's a dirty secret, not so secret, from four-year schools. They use their financial aid to attract freshmen. So you can take two students, one who's a rising junior who came into that school as a freshman, and another is a rising junior who came from a community college. They have exactly the same financial condition. One of them gets more aid than the other, and you know which one that is. So ask that they treat transfers fairly, that they take them at scale. And if they say, well, community college enrollments are down, there aren't enough of them, call me. We'll share the data. We've got state-by-state data. There are right now, every year, in this country, 12,500 students graduate from community college with a 3.7 average or better.
Yeah.
They don't go to any four-year school. They're in every state. The number is even bigger for those with a 3.0 average. These are students who are ready to roll, right? They're ready to excel, and they're not going anywhere. So
I'll give you a cell phone number after the session.
I think we'll take a couple more. What is the best source for defining value when we talk about credentials of value? Do you want me to start with that one?
Yeah, and we'll add color commentary.
Yeah, so we work with colleges to set a living wage standard in their community. There are two sources of that. The Georgetown Center for Education and the Economy, or Education and Workforce, has put out a basic standard based on how old a student is. There are two different standards. That can be adjusted for the cost of living in your community. And then MIT has put out a cost calculator for what a living wage is. Frankly, I think what we care about is that colleges set some standard and then assess their programs against it. It matters less what the standard is than it does that colleges are taking seriously the question. Obviously, if it's for a single individual, that will look different than it does for a single individual with a kid or with two kids, or right? I mean, you can see that there's a lot of complication in that. Those are two sources to look at. But the key is when colleges start to look at the results of their programs and how they stack up with the wages that they've set, they start to look differently at what their job is. Not just access and completion, but access and completion of a credential of value, a credential that sets a student up for a better life. Moving to the next one, what makes a career center at a community college great? Are we getting the most out of our career centers? Who'd like to tackle that one?
I think what makes it great is when it is integrated into a bigger plan and not just offered as a thing that we hope students use. Career centers, when they're integrated into the learning, into the curriculum by class or by program, and are thoughtfully included from orientation and recruiting and orientation through completion, are a tool to the bigger end game, not just a resource that we offer. And I think we have an epidemic in higher education of listing all the resources that are available to students and then tisking the student, tisk, when they don't use it, because it's not offered at a convenient time, or it's not explained in a way that makes sense, or it's not integrated into their learning experiences. The best career centers are ones that are integrated into the student experience, not just offered as something students can engage.
And the only thing I would add to that is they are also going deeper into the pipeline in the K through 12 system in order to expose students to the pathways at the college. Some of the really good ones are even going as deep as middle school and offering summer camps, because there's a recognition that students need more exposure in order to understand the career pathways and the options in their communities.
Great. I think we're just about at time. Russell, can you speak about bachelor's degree program? This is the speed round now.
Okay.
Bachelor's degree programs at ACC.
There are 4 bachelor's degree programs at ACC. There's Baccalaureate of Nursing, of Cybersecurity, of Environmental Engineering or Engineering, Engineering and Software Development. Really proud of our trustees, one of which is sitting in the second row, Manny Gonzalez. They're seriously engaging in an ACC free tuition program that would include bachelor's, because the cost of getting a bachelor's is preventing a swath of families of obtaining them. And I think it's why you see community colleges in the space of offering baccalaureate degrees. It's the cost and accessibility and the workforce needs that we're not meeting in our traditional four-year space.
Yeah, and so if there are any four-year leaders or folks listening to this, this is happening across the country. If you don't want community colleges competing for bachelor's degrees, partner with them to deliver bachelor's degrees in your community. Partner with them. The more you see them as competition, the more legislatures are going to say, okay, then they can offer the bachelor's degrees as well. Why not? Why not? If you're blocking off that route to a bachelor's degree or not taking credits, this is what's going to end up happening, and it should. Community college students need access to a bachelor's. Pascal, anything on that sheet that you'd like to
Yep, I will
address?
tackle, building on this theme of partnerships, the idea of if wanting to lead your school district to drive a different kind of conversation with your community college. And I think it's this spirit of collaboration and common purpose that can get you there. One way to start is looking at how your students are performing at the community college, and to disaggregate the data to understand by pathway and to understand which students are performing and excelling and which ones are underperforming. It's a great starting point for a conversation. And I would challenge you to help set a bold vision for your community. What are you aiming for when you're thinking about talent development, for which positions through the regional economy, and which communities do you want to make sure are not left behind?
Yeah, I would just add to that one. That's the one that caught my attention as well. Look, dual enrollment is as inequitable as AP has been in this country, right? It is white students, Asian students, and upper income students who are taking those courses, and that's terrific for those students. But the reality is, for lower income students, for black students, for Native American students, for Latinx students, they are not taking dual enrollment at the same rate. So for those of you in K-12, look at the data. Where are students, even if you're in a Title I school, who in that Title I school is taking these courses? And make a commitment to changing those things. If you share those data with your community college partner, they probably will care about those inequities as well. So I would say that's another way of starting that conversation. So we're at the closing moment. By the way, there are resources up here with a lot of information for the question from funders about transfer. We have assessment tools for 2- and 4-year colleges to assess their own practices against research-based practices. There's a lot of really practical stuff up there that Aspen has produced, sometimes alone, sometimes with our partners at the Community College Research Center. I'd encourage you to look at those things and think about how you might apply them in your work, whether that's grant making, K-12 education, higher education, or otherwise. I'll start with you, Russell, for closing remarks, to you, Pascal, and then we'll close out.
No matter what intervention you're going to base your transformation around, if it is not rooted in love and care for your students, it will never work. And what our students tell us over and over and over is they need us to love them to success through our interventions, but you can't separate the relational and personal from the work that we often engage in education.
2 thoughts. Tammy, who has a concern about general education, see me before you leave. Secondly, be big and be bold. Aim for scale. We have no more time to waste. And for too long, we've neglected populations who deserve a bite at the American dream. So don't hesitate to play big and aim for scale.
And the last thing I would just say is keep those twin goals in mind. When you're reading the press, when you're doing your work, higher education, the issues in higher education that unite us are economic and social mobility on the one hand, and talent development on the other. Who can be opposed to that? But when you actually think about what we're talking about in the work that we do, in your daily work, in the press, et cetera, we don't talk about those issues. So keep asking yourself that question. How much of what I'm experiencing, am I doing, am I contributing, am I reading about, am I learning about, is about these fundamental purposes of higher ed? All the other things that we talk about matter, but they're in service of some fundamental goals. And if we all start asking those questions, I think we're more likely to have elected representatives, more likely to have educational systems, and more likely to have communities that are investing in the critical purposes of higher education. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.